Despite what most people believe, things are usually not black and white. They're more gray. You're watching Making Sense with Robbie. Let's get started. For the last 4 years, or the previous 4 years, everyone was always talking about Trump. And Trump was like a really good dividing person, because there were people who absolutely loved him and there were people who absolutely hated him. And there was this sort of consensus, or this belief, that he was either evil or that he was actually like the best person ever. And I would sort of feel like, and I would say that there's something in between, right? Like, he wasn't the best, he wasn't the worst, he was different for sure, but it's something that was very polarizing. It was certainly like a topic that was very controversial, and it was easy for people to pick sides, or people were forced to pick sides. Sort of the more rational sort of expectation, or the more rational position, would have been to like be in the middle, because you know what, like, he actually wasn't that terrible. He wasn't actually that good either. So he wasn't either, right? It was more like it wasn't a black and white thing. It was more of a gray thing. And we're always sort of asked to pick sides. We're always like pushed to seeing things as good or bad. There's always this sort of pressure to pick a side, to be for something or against it. And there's not a lot of like encouragement to sort of have like a sort of centralist or like a neutral position on things. And I would say often, like, when an idea is pushed to us through the media or through any other means, it usually sort of frames things in a way that makes it necessary for you to pick a side. Like, you have to either kind of be with us or against us. You can't have like a nuanced position. You can't have like a little sort of in the middle position, because usually the way that stories are framed, it's like you're supposed to have this sort of quick emotional response to it. And like, that's supposed to be like sort of what you stick with. Like, whether or not that's what someone's intention is, that is what it seems like when when ideas are presented, when events are presented, or when stories are presented. I haven't really often seen on the news having like a real sort of debate about having two sides of an argument presenting their ideas. Like, sometimes TV shows will do that, like specialized shows will do that. It's not usually presented that way. It's usually presented as like, here is one side, it's the right side, you should believe it, and it's because it's the truth. And then the other side is automatically evil. There's no debate here. There's no conversation here. There's no need to debate. It could be partially as well. It could be that like having ideas that are sort of simple to digest and like are polarizing is more likely to get engagement. And so there could be like a financial incentive for presenting stories in this way as well. Another way that this has happened recently is like sort of the trust the science. There's this idea that like you either trust the science or you don't. The truth, or the reality of it is that there's a lot of nuance, and there's a lot of differing opinions. Like, it's not clear cut as people would like you to believe, and that maybe there is some space for debate. Maybe there is some space for sort of going into the details and digging in the weeds, getting a better sense of things. Like, it isn't always black and white, even if we're sort of presented things that way, even if we're sort of told to think of things that way. They usually aren't black and white. There's usually something in between that is just as valid or more valid than either side. But again, things are like really complicated. There's lots of details. There's lots of complexity to sort of the events that are happening in the world around us. And so it's really hard to know what the truth is. And so sometimes it's lazy, or it's just easier to pick a side, because then you don't really have to dig in the weeds. You don't really have to understand the details. You can just kind of have like an emotional response, and you can stick with it, and you can like use that as your framework for sort of moving forward and thinking about things. And that is easy, and that is lazy, but like, it's also not necessarily the objective truth. It's not actually sort of digging for what really matters. It's not really getting to what you want to get to. If you're sort of looking for the truth, if you're looking for the objective truth, if you're looking to truly understand something, picking a side is easy, but it's not really what you should do, because that's not how it works, right? You don't pick a side, you follow the evidence and see where it goes. Oftentimes people will see doubt or like reluctance to make a choice as weakness. But I would say like it's the opposite. It's like actually the most rational way to look at the situation. If you don't know all of the facts, if you don't have a sort of a good argument presented to you, then you should sort of be neutral. You should sort of stick to the agnostic position. For a lot of things, I would hold a sort of position of agnostic, because I don't really know. I have no idea what the truth is. I just kind of have some ideas, and some of those ideas lead to something conclusions, but other ideas lead to different conclusions. So to pick a side is often sort of neglecting or disregarding the fact that there's this sort of gray, that there's this nuance, that there's this in between that probably better explains things, but it's not as easy to say like, well, I have this middle position. And in some ways, you would say like if someone has power or they have money or influence, then they might want to sort of get you to choose a side, because like once you choose a side, then you have kind of engaged in sort of division. And so once you choose a side, then that's that's kind of like a thesis, and then there automatically becomes like an antithesis or the opposite position. And so like it's really easy to create division amongst people if you act like everything is black and white, that there's a right answer and a wrong answer, and if you don't agree with the right answer, then you're wrong. It's a good way of sort of creating division. And for people with power and influence, it's good for us to have division, because once we're divided, then we're not working together. We're not on the same side. And so it's easier to keep the status quo if we don't challenge or we don't question our assumptions. And so when we pick sides, we kind of like stick to our sides, and we don't necessarily investigate the gray. We don't investigate the middle ground. And even though the best solution might be found there, it's not necessarily going to be encouraged, because people with power don't necessarily want unity. They want us divided, because if we're divided, then we're easier to control. And two, like just thinking clearly about things, like just like kind of looking at the details, like that requires a lot of nuance. And a lot of times, especially when we're having like quick communications between like social media, then we don't really understand what someone's position is. We just have like a kind of a quick shot at what their ideas are. That is easy because that's just sort of the way that we can communicate things, but then we lose the details, we lose the nuance, and the nuance is usually where the truth lies. In a lot of cases, like you have like these contradictions, like you have these two like sort of opposing ideas, or at least they seem like opposing ideas, but they can be like kind of both true at the same time. And it's only through nuance and discussion that you could realize how both things could be true at the same time, even if they don't seem they are true at the same time. But again, like thinking clearly about things, it's usually more rational to look at both sides, take in both sides of evidence, think about them clearly, and sort of realize, okay, well, like both of these sides are justified in their actions. Like both of these positions have some validity. One of them isn't clearly correct and the other is clearly wrong. There's always an in-between. There's always nuance. There's always the center. Sometimes people will say, well, don't be a centralist. Don't go to the center. Pick a side. Like once you have people believing in certain ideas, then you can push those ideas to the extreme, and you can make them totally irrational, and you can make them incompatible with other people's ideas, even though those other people probably have very similar ideas. It's only like small things that they're focused on that they disagree on. And I say this because I remember reading about this person who said that he said, well, like I'm agnostic, but people don't really want to hear that you're agnostic. They want you to choose a side. So let's just say I'm an atheist. But it's just like it's easier for people to see a side. It's easier for people to pick a side, especially like if they're asking someone else what they believe, because it's easier to like look at that other person and see, well, like categorize them based on one position on one thing. And while picking sides has its benefits, it also has its disadvantages, especially when we're looking for objective truth, especially when we're trying to understand things, because again, the details is where the meat is. The details is where the truth is. And so my advice here would be, don't choose for like the simplistic or the oversimplified explanations that kind of force you into picking a side. Instead, look at all the details, look at all the evidence, follow it where it will take you. But if you don't want to, or you can't make a decision based on the evidence, then that's fine. It's fine to be in the gray. It's fine to be in the middle. You don't have to pick sides. In fact, it's better not to pick sides. Sometimes you don't know the answers, and that's okay too. It's okay to admit that you don't know. So let me know in the comments below what you think. Do you find that you get pulled into sort of black and white arguments, or are you someone who's more willing to sort of look at the gray? If you found this informative or entertaining, then click that like button. If you are curious about learning how to think about things, but you don't want to be told what to think about them, then click that subscribe button, because that's what I'm here for. You've been watching Making Sense with Robbie. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk next time. Goodbye.